Hey people. This is a subject I've covered many times on this channel, but I think it is very, very, very important. Domestically speaking, I think it's one of the most important issues for me, and I suspect for many people actually. I'm not saying it's the only important issue. Obviously, there's a lot of things going on right now. There is the cost of living crisis. There's the railway strikes. There's a lot of things going on. But for me personally, this is something that's very emotive. And people say sometimes that you shouldn't approach any subject with emotions. And I understand that because it can sometimes blind you to thinking in an objective way, especially if you're particularly angry or raw about something. On the other hand, people are not robots. So I think it's unrealistic to expect people not to have strong feelings about a given subject. And I feel very strongly about the issue of crime and justice. I may sound like I'm repeating some things I've said before, but I think it's important to just reiterate them because there's cases that have come up that I think are a reminder of the sort of contentions that I have. Um, the Rochdale grooming scandal of the early 2010s, one of the perpetrators of that abuse, and he has been described as a ringleader, is now whining about the fact he might be deported back to Pakistan. He's whining about his human rights. Apparently, his lawyers are going to argue there's a lack of consistency because one of the other defendants got to stay. This is one of those things that is covered by the European Court of Human Rights, and why the British side is arguing it should be replaced by a British Bill of Rights. Now, that's one area where I would definitely be on the pro UK side of things. It is perverse and wrong that a foreign national could commit a heinous, evil crime in this country and get to stay in this country, even if it is behind bars. Um, I think if you commit a crime as heinous as that, then your rights go out the window, basically, apart from basic rights. Um, so if he was worried about being deported back to Pakistan, he shouldn't have groomed little girls. Another case which occurred close to me last October. I didn't actually hear about it at the time. This is something because the trials just come up recently. A lot of justice, incidentally, was held back by the pandemic. That was one of the really adverse effects of the pandemic, stalling down the justice process. But anyway, young man, Jack Woodley, 18 years old, in Houghton-le-Spring, it's a town near Sunderland, the end of last year, he was surrounded and basically attacked savagely by a gang of teenagers, 10 of them. And they put up their hoodies and they stabbed him to death. They'd all been drinking and they were out looking for trouble. Now, this young lad was totally unknown to them. To use that awful expression, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Um, I find it chilling. Some of the perpetrators was young as 14. Find it chilling. But it's not the only case. Also up here in the northeast, and I mentioned this before, um, uh, a young man in the town of Cramlington. I was going to say young father. I'm not sure if he was a father actually, but he might have been. In the town of Cramlington, Northumberland, which is known for deprivation, that part of Northumberland has a lot of problems with poverty and drug abuse. Anyway, he was leaving a restaurant with his partner, and he got into an altercation with youths, and they beat him to death. So those two cases, pretty similar, both involving young offenders. And I just find it utterly chilling because We have a situation in this country where teenagers are prepared to kill a total stranger, not to steal from him or her, but just because of sheer depravity. Now, I think that those sort of crimes should result in very, very long sentences. I would say, in both cases, an absolute minimum of 15 years with no parole and no early release at all. A minimum 15 years. I think 20 years would be more appropriate. But because of their age, they'll probably get a lot less. And my contention would be, by the way, in England and Wales, the age of criminal responsibility is 10, so they're above that age. My view would be if they're going to kill a stranger at the age of 14 or 15, they're capable of anything. They're dangerous. And people shouldn't assume just because they're young they're not dangerous. As happened in the Cramlington case, they killed a grown man, a young man, but a grown man about the same age as me. And I've had my experience of crime. I've lived in a rough area for 2 years. Me and my family were really harassed by yobs. We had to leave. It got really unpleasant, and that experience has stayed with me. Um, really stayed with me. Um, I just think that in recent decades in this country, we've been far, far too enabling of criminals, especially young offenders. It's just, it's really something that bothers me because, of course, you need to look into the root causes. And common sense dictates if you have a 15 or 16-year-old and let's say their father's an alcoholic and their mother's a prostitute, clearly they're going to have a bad upbringing. Clearly that's going to have a negative effect. Um, so we tackle those problems. But that does not mean that once the act is done, you show them leniency. Because, oh, well, they've had a tough upbringing. Um, I say the victim must always, 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 always come first. Always. And I don't believe that's the case. That some things gradually change for the better. For example, Dominic Raab introduced a victims bill recently. That's good. I made a video about it. The details of that are good. For example, victims will have more say in parole hearings. Well, that's a good thing. Certainly, it's welcome. But there really is a lot more to do, and I think that it will take more than one Justice Secretary and more than one policy to change this. I think the big contention is that the people who make the legislation on sentencing, namely the Sentencing Council of England and Wales, I think there's similar bodies in Scotland and Northern Ireland. They just, in my opinion, they're not accountable. They're unelected, therefore their jobs are not on the line if their decisions are unpopular. That's different from politicians because if you don't like what your MP is doing, at least you have the chance to vote them out of office. That's not possible for the Sentencing Council. They're made up of legal bureaucrats who I don't think really understand public anger. Now, they have public consultation in some areas, but certainly not every area. Um, if members of the public feel that sentencing is too lenient, individuals can write to the Attorney General and petition her to have a case reviewed. But the vast majority of cases don't change. In other words, the vast majority of cases where people feel the sentence was too lenient, it doesn't change with a more hardline sentence. Nothing changes. So I think our legal system is very undemocratic. I'm not suggesting that justice should be determined solely by public sentiment. I'm not suggesting that at all. Of course, each case needs to be looked at on its own merit, aggravating factors, mitigating factors, and so on. But I am convinced that the system is out of touch. I am convinced that the vast majority of people feel powerless. They feel that we have a soft justice system and there's nothing they can do about it. And politicians talk tough, but words are cheap. Like I say, I commend Rab for that policy, but it will take a lot more. Um, I would like to see the Sentencing Council far more answerable for their leniency. But they don't really, they have a website and they have some public consultation. But if you ask a member of the public who heads the sentencing council, I bet nobody could say who that is. Yet they have a lot of power when you think about it. They are literally determining millions of lives, really, by extension, because it's not just the victim and the defendants, it's their families as well. And yet they're not really answerable to the public. I think that's wrong. I think at the very least their head should be elected something akin to the police commissioners. We'll never have a situation where crime is extinct, right? But I do think we can have a situation where sentencing is far more reflective of the gravity of crime. And I think we can have a situation where criminals start fearing justice, and they don't. They don't, especially young offenders. They're not frightened of justice. In some cases, they literally laugh at it. They see it as a badge of honour. That has to change. I think we need to tackle toxic gang culture and everything within. So we need to teach young men that there's nothing brave or courageous about being a thug. It needs to be that lifestyle is toxic, and it needs to be, I think, really, really entrenched in education and in other areas. I think bad parents, abusive parents, I think the law needs to come down like a ton of bricks on them because it is a cycle. Obviously, if they abuse a child and they're an alcoholic or a drug addict or whatever, and that's going to negatively affect the child. So it's a cycle. So I do believe in very harsh consequences for abusive parents. Um, I accept there's no quick fix to this, but honestly, I feel so drained of it sometimes. It's so depressing and so infuriating. And you just know. I mean, that case in Houghton in Spring, the sentence hasn't, it's due for August. But I just know, because of their age, they're probably going to get less than 10 years. That is the price of taking a young man's life. I think it should be a minimum of 15 to 20 years at least. Because I'm telling you, if a 15-year-old stabs a stranger to death for no reason, they're capable of anything, really. So it's not just a question of justice, it's a question of public safety as well. And it just disgusts me, quite honestly, um, how out of touch the justice system is. I really believe it is. Now, people might say judges have their hands tied. It's true to some extent because they have sentencing thresholds, but I argue that more often than not, they go for the lower end of the scale by choice. That's their choice as a judge to do that, even when they have the aggravating factors at hand. And we have this situation where the jury hears the evidence, yet they have no insight into the sentence. Now, I accept that ultimately it should be down to the judge, but surely the whole point of a jury system is for an insight, is that they weigh up the evidence and determine whether someone is guilty or not. Now, if they've seen the evidence, surely they should have some insight into what happens. I mean, a recommendation, for example. I'm not saying the jury should decide the sentence. I'm saying they should have a say in it. Because the whole point of a jury system is they're meant to be a cross representation of society. Tried by a jury of your peers. So what's the point of it if they have no say in what happens? I mean, honestly, I just find the whole thing draining. And I admit, I mean, I don't think it's healthy to live in fear. I'm not the sort of person to sort of think, well, I'm leaving my house, I'm going to be mugged or something. That's not healthy. But I just think that the two cases I named, the two cases of people being attacked that I named, they would have just been getting on with the day. They wouldn't have known what was going to happen. It's flipping terrifying, actually. It's abhorrent and it's disgusting, but it's also terrifying, actually. And the about it is, actual homicide rates in this country are quite low. So it's not that Britain is a particularly dangerous country, but we have crime, and when it happens, I don't think the outcome is as it should be. It has to change. I mean, I've long considered starting up some sort of pressure body or think tank or something. I don't know. I need to do research into it, but something has to change. And if I do go with that, of course, I'll try and publicize it because I'll want to get maximum exposure to that. Thanks for watching.